we welcome Mikayla. And I think this is Mikayla's first presentation from the United States, right? Not the first EPERN presentation, but first as a senior fellow at the Mercatus Center. And this work comes out of Mikayla's dissertation. So it's entangled innovation, and with the discussions around decarbonization. So I think that's all from me.
All
and
right.
yeah, the screen is yours.
Okay, so let me see. Let's do this. Just bear with me momentarily as I just get all the settings. Hopefully, there we are. That's good. So thank you, one and all, for being here, and it's always a great honour and privilege to present at the EPERN seminar series. So this presentation that I'm giving to you today is basically so there's sort of an instrumental purpose for me. So it's a bit of a dry run for what is effectively a thesis defense that I'll be doing next month. But there's a broader sort of intellectual substantive purpose behind this work as well, to illustrate potential novelties and versatility within the sort of the context of entangled political economy, to bring sort of empirical sort of work, to bring an empirical basis to work in entangled political economy, and then to sort of think about the multi-layered sort of facets of entangled political economies, because human action is undertaken not only within sort of one domain of networked interactivity with other people, but can simultaneously be conducted on a number of fronts all at once. And so, so the multi-layered or the multi-level sort of aspects of activity of entanglement brought to light through this work. So allow me just to sort of provide some context, if I may. So the first notable feature is that this study pertains to my home country of Australia, to examine effectively online communication networks around the topic of hydrogen decarbonisation. So what is hydrogen decarbonisation? Well, it basically involves the production of hydrogen, and this is seen as a potential pathway towards deeply decarbonising whole economies. And so when we refer to hydrogen, or the hype surrounding hydrogen, we think of utopic imagined futures with respect to transformations in likes of energy, transportation, manufacturing, so-called clean production of energy, and the transformation of systems away from hydrocarbon sort of productions and techniques of production. So in Australia, as in many other places around the world, I referred to hydrogen as exhibiting the characteristic of hype, and that is certainly true. In Australia, at least, there have been, the last time I counted, under 100 hydrogen project trials. I think this number would surely have increased since the time I last counted in November 2021. And a very conspicuous feature of hydrogen economy activity is there is significant co-involvements by certain, and using Sir Roger Coppell's sort of notion of big players. There are major corporate sort of entities, major commercial enterprises that are interacting with governmental agencies, and it's very evident. One doesn't even have to go into a probing analysis from a entangled political economy perspective to understand that there are actually close relationships developing in this hydrogen decarbonisation space between sort of commercial and political enterprises. And so, again, I refer to a number of Australian dollar amount of the amount of subsidies that are given by all levels of government in Australia towards these hydrogen decarbonisation project trials. Well, the number will have increased. It probably has doubled, if not more, since the last time I checked, which was a couple of years ago. And so, in addition to those sort of deep entanglements, or tight entanglements between major commercial enterprises, and you'll find some surprising players in terms of which corporate actors are involved in this space. You'll actually find hydrocarbon sort of energy companies, even mining companies, so deeply entangled with political financing and policy advisory agencies. But furthermore, the entanglement is more extensive than that. The entanglement involves contributions by academics, and the academia is in itself quite heavily funded by government agencies, and they're sort of broader sort of methodological and normative issues with respect to the relationship between sort of academia, which is providing overwhelmingly advice, intellectual advice to decarbonize economies, with government agencies with specific roles to try to advance decarbonization, with firms, with major companies that are advancing hydrogen and other forms of decarbonisation. There are research institutes, there are non-government organisations, there are climate activists. So, you can imagine a weird and wonderful world of hydrogen where there is actually diversity in those entanglements in terms of the actors and their representations. And so the final point I'll just make here, is by way of a context, is that consistent with the earlier statement of mine that hydrogen and hydrogen talk is characterized by hype, there are certain advocates in this space, including sort of prominent advocates that tout Australia as a potential hydrocarbons, sort of almost a Freudian slip, but I'll get to that in a minute, actually, where some advocates are proclaiming Australia to be a potential hydrogen superpower. And the irony here, and I'll go back to the slip, is that Australia is already a hydrocarbon superpower, in terms of production of coal, gas. It also has a very rich deposits of uranium as well. So there's interesting tectonic tensions in terms of positioning Australia as some sort of decarbonisation superpower. The claims that, there's a lot of wind in the country, there's a lot of sun, we're surrounded by water, and hydrogen's part of that mix. There's interesting tensions and juxtapositions between that and the fact that Australia already has a very well developed and advanced sort of hydrocarbon economy, which in some important respects has actually been actively dismantled over the past 10-15 years. For example, a couple of very important coal electricity generation plants for lignite, that is brown coal, being sort of shut down and blown up, basically. So there are definitely sort of tensions, and to speak to tension speaks to the kind of the nature of entanglement, right? So where Dick Wagner is reminding us that entanglements are not necessarily typified by consensus, by unanimity, but there's actually conflict and differences of perspectives, which hopefully this research will reveal. So I'm basically, so the conceptual innovation of the work here is to basically articulate hydrogen decarbonization, and this can be extendable to other forms of innovation, to refer to hydrogen decarbonization as a species of what I call entangled innovation. So the idea is that innovation does not sort of proceed along soloistic or charismatic lines, as you might sort of discern from popular readings, at least of the likes of Schumpeter and similar sort of classical or iconic treatments. But innovation is quintessentially a deeply sociological and interconnected process where you have a range of actors and stakeholders seeking gains. In this case, in hydrogen, it's a beginning, it's a sort of embryonic innovation space. And so I go one step further on this idea of entangled innovation to say, look, that hydrogen decarbonization, at the very least, involves multi-layered network interactivity amongst actors. And the extent of interactivity is not limited to resources. Implicitly, much of the discussion in entangled political economy concerns resource networks, the exchanges on materialities in political and economic exchanges. What should be understood, and entangled innovation provides that understanding, is that these network interactivities are occurring across several dimensions, across several fields of activity at once. And this can include communication networks, which are emergent alongside, as I sort of indicate on the right-hand side, finance networks, material logistic networks, regulatory policy networks, all happening all at once in sort of multi-layered fashion. The significance of the two figures that I present here is that on the left-hand side, it's just a simple cut and paste out of a textbook on network theory, where multi-layered networks are sort of treated as effectively sort of separable. So you sort of have these different planes of network interactions, which are sort of interlinked by the fact that given actors are co-present across these different sort of layers or planes. What Wagner reminds us, though, I think very helpfully, is that complicated and multi-dimensional, multi-layered sort of human action and interactivity takes place on the same plane of societal interaction and understanding. And so on the right-hand side, all I've got here is a bit of a mocked up example as to what an entangled innovation space might look like for hydrogen. We've got sort of circled actors, which are commercial enterprises. I've denoted one of the circled nodes as my particular entity, hydrogen entity company of concern. And as you can see, this same entity is operating in various domains of activity. They're operating in the space of regulation, interacting with the triangles, which are the governmental enterprises, the public sector entities. This same hydrogen firm, the grey shaded circle, it's also interacting at the same time in terms of organising material logistics for their hydrogen trials. Then there's sort of finance network, and note in my diagram, I give particular emphasis on entanglement between the hydrogen firm and two governmental entities that operate in that space. So what I'm referring to in this mock-up example here is the fact that the hydrogen company is being entirely financed, courtesy of the taxpayer. And then there's a communication network on the bottom right-hand side, and that's a particular focus of my study, because certainly, as Wagner has noted throughout his work, but also is indicated in a very helpful chapter published in 2021 by Adam Martin, the fact of the matter is that communication is an important coordinative device which can facilitate entanglements not only within sort of media networks, for example, social media, which we'll examine in a minute, but also communication acts to facilitate coordination, shared understandings and meanings in other domains of activity. So, for example, Dick Wagner, in a couple of his books, refers to the communicative activities of innovators who are seeking investment opportunities with favorable brokers. So they go to financial companies, intermediaries, venture capitalists, and the like. And obviously, they're engaging in communication to persuade financiers to finance their innovative project. An example of this was given in Wagner's Mind, Society and Human Action, his 2010 book. So this is the research, so the conceptual context of the study. I'm positing a new concept of entangled innovation to really bring to light this sort of these interconnected webs of innovation. So I'll just sort of run through this very quickly. So what I'm wanting to understand is a particular communication network that pertains to the phenomenon of entangled innovation. I'm particularly interested in how people communicate about hydrogen decarbonisation on Twitter. Twitter has sort of many properties. There are many users, and most significantly, from perspective of research. And as an aside, if anyone in the background there can just mute, that'd be great. So another aspect of Twitter is that it actually has relatively easy data collection facilities through their APIs. So I found this particularly easy to and straightforward to collect a range of data about how people are tweeting about hydrogen decarbonisation. So I had a range of research questions that I was negotiating. And so for this presentation, I'm basically dealing with the first subsidiary question, that is, how is a hydrogen decarbonisation network structured on Twitter? And so I'm engaging in the act empirically of trying to identify a network. Now, if we have time during this presentation, and Marta will be the ultimate arbiter and determinant of that, I do have some additional background appendix information about the nature of semantic networks and also sentiment networks that arose from my study. All right, so I just want to sort of walk through quickly about to illustrate to you how you can actually empirically construct networks. And this is especially useful for entangled political economy studies. So one of the first challenges in trying to empirically construct a network is to actually identify your boundaries for your network. And that comes in sort of multiple of guises. You need to understand, first of all, what are your nodes of your network? Well, the nodes for my network are Twitter user accounts. And then to understand what are links, what are ties. Well, for social media studies, Twitter has a very handy property in which tweets, replies, and mentions amongst users can be represented as links or ties in a communication network. A very well-established property and an especially helpful one in this respect in studies of social media networks. And then furthermore, to account for the fact that, look, I mean, a Twitter network can be very expansive by definition, given the millions of active users. There are over 300 million active users around the world. I then actually set out to identify a conceptual boundary for my network. And so given that the core objective of my study is to understand how people talk about hydrogen decarbonisation in Australia, I identified, drawing upon a range of policy documents and government submissions to parliaments and so on and so forth, I identified close to 200 actors that have been involved in the early stages of hydrogen decarbonisation discussion and policy interest. And so after identifying the close to 200 actors, I then manually set them or categorize them in accordance with their sort of roles within the network. So you'll have commercial actors, political actors, business representative organizations, research institutes and academics. You'll have climate activists. So essentially, for those 197 actors, close to 200, of course, I manually sort of categorized those actors, and that's how I identified the network. And then, as I've indicated previously, I was able to use the Twitter API to scrape data from Twitter over a 6-month basis from mid 20. It should actually be 2022 in the sort of dot point there at the slide. So I had a 6-month collection period from July 2021 to December 2021, which rolled over into the new year, into January 2022. And I used an R package called Voson SML, which was developed by researchers at Australian National University. A very handy package to be able to construct online media networks, social media networks. And then finally, because of the data scraping gave me a whole range of data with respect to the 197 actors and the individuals and the groups that spoke to the 197 on all range of topics. It could be, weather conditions in the local area, or what's your favorite food, through to discussions about hydrogen networks and policy. I further filtered the data using a word filter. So basically, any tweets that included the words hydrogen or H2 were included in my final data set. Okay, so after that filtering process, I was able to obtain close to 37,000 unique tweets over that 6-month period to late 2021. So it's interesting here to look at the right-hand side diagram. These are the number of tweets that were collected on a daily basis, and you'll see a big spike towards the sort of latter part of 2021. Anyone with even a sort of a casual interest in climate change policy developments would know and will recall that there was the COP26 United Nations conference in Glasgow in sort of October-November 2021, hosted by the Johnson government in the UK at the time. And so that represents a spike. I think there's also another spike in the diagram around the middle of August 2021, and that's coincident with the Australian domestic policy release. So what I also provide here in the slide here, a couple of example tweets, just to sort of show you the range of sort of information and insights that were discussed by entangled actors in this network. The first example tweet is by a Queensland state government minister by the name of Lance McCallum. Actually, as a matter of fact, this Lance McCallum fellow is actually the state political representative in my home district in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia. So in McCallum's tweet, he's basically referring to a policy announcement. The Queensland state government has just showered an amount of money to a renewable energy company to develop a hydrogen facility in central Queensland, Australia. Another example tweet, the middle one, by Climate Council. The Climate Council is an activist NGO, and they're referring to a person by the name of Andrew Forrest. Andrew Forrest is very interesting. He's an Australian mining magnate with not only sort of hydrocarbon interests, pecuniary interests, but he also is very active in trying to expand and introduce renewable technologies into Australia. So the middle tweet there by Climate Council is referring to some part funding by this mining magnate, Andrew Forrest, to develop a new so-called green hydrogen facility in Western Australia. What might be interesting for all of us is the final example tweet by some random person. I don't know who this person is, Crispy Dog, whoever that might be. And tellingly, and I'll refer to the quote, the tweet by Mr. or Ms. Crispy Dogs reads as follows: green hydrogen, which has been advanced by Andrew Forrest, is a rent seeker's paradise. That Forrest is campaigning for it without any economic modelling. There is only one conclusion, according to this synonymous person, that Andrew Forrest, the advocate for hydrogen, is lining up our wallets to underwrite his newest ventures. And so the significance of that tweet points to the fact that there is criticism about hydrogen decarbonisation evident in Twitter discursive networks, and especially among the periphery of the network that I'll illustrate to you soon. Around the periphery are these sort of smaller actors that might have a peripheral interest in hydrogen, but tend to actually be very highly critical of the range of hydrogen projects that have been advanced in the Australian economy, including on allegations of rent-seeking, low-level corruption. The many discussants in Twitter problematize the use of non-renewable technologies as inputs into hydrogen production. So this is your so-called blue hydrogen. A lot of people are actually critical about that. So this is what the overall network looks like. Yes, there is certainly a lot of actors, and there's apparently a lot of sort of graphical sort of density here. But what I got on the right-hand side is basically a snapshot of the central area for that network. And so some of these more prominent actors with their sort of names bolded, enlarged, and highlighted are a range of political actors, a couple of representative organisations, and even private companies. So here we can see with this overall network, we have over 8,500 nodes. That's a lot, with over 23,000 ties. Again, these ties, what are they? They are tweets, original tweets, reply tweets, or mention tweets. And so if we look at some of the other network statistics, they're particularly useful and interesting. So the average degree of the network is 2.8. And so what that is saying is essentially that any of these nodes on average have 2.8 connections with other nodes, okay? But what's actually interesting here, if you look at the graph density statistic is very low. And I think you can really see that on the left-hand side anyway. There's a lot of actors on the periphery that might not tweet on a regular basis, and sort of only will sort of tweet the central actors if peripherally. Another statistic I'll mention to you as well is the modularity statistic, 0.715. And so that's a relatively high number. And so what this is indicating is that there are actually clusters within this whole network where you have different kinds of actors that are associating with one another in terms of chatter and discourse about hydrogen decarbonisation. So what I've done here is because there are over 8,000 nodes, and it's difficult to actually see how some of the influential actors are connected, what I'd done is I basically recalibrated the network to only look at the 197, that is close to 200 reference set actors that I initially collected for on a regular basis to see how they are connected. And so what we see here, at least graphically or illustratively, we do see some clusters of connections between the initial actors, the reference set actors that I collected on. And so again, who are these actors? Well, you have commercial enterprises, you have political enterprises. You'll also have, not so much within this particular subnetwork, but you'll also have a couple of NGOs and climate change activists, again, referring to the earlier point that some of the activists, some of the critics of hydrogen decarbonisation are more located, at least graphically in the network, on the periphery of the network. But nonetheless, even on the right-hand side, I can identify a couple of these NGOs or activists, including the Climate Council that I referred to earlier, also a fellow by the name of Oliver Yates, who's a climate change activist, and others as well. So to help round out the actor network dimension of analysis, I'm interested in finding out to what extent we could establish an empirical indication of entanglement amongst those 200 actors. And so what I went about doing was to basically use the Simpson Diversity Index to be able to establish the degree of entanglement amongst my initial reference set actors. And so the computed entanglement index for this subnetwork here is quite high, 0.733. So the Simpson index is on a scale from 0, that is no diversity, or I refer to it as entanglement, to 1, which is full diversity or full entanglement. And so you can see that the number is actually quite high. And as I indicated in with respect to this subnetwork here, there are clusters. And so I was able to compute these entanglement index scores for the different clusters which are high. So obviously the subnetwork of reference actors are highly entangled, and it's presumed a similar conclusion can readily be made for the whole network that I was able to quantitatively identify. So what are some takeout conclusions here? Well, I think this research can contribute toward an understanding of communication surrounding an embryonic form of innovation, in this case, hydrogen decarbonisation, which involves multiple stakeholders. And we have and we were able to confirm that there is a network structure emergent on Twitter with respect to discourse about hydrogen decarbonisation. And this network structure online is informed by entangled relationships, primarily amongst elite actors with influential roles in business and politics, and to a lesser extent, engagement and research, business representation, and climate activism. One of the features of this study, I believe, is that it contributes towards the empirical branch of entangled political economy inquiry, and it also reinforces the versatility of general computational social science empirical tools, particularly online network software packages. The study also contributes conceptually, I argue, because it highlights the nature of multi-layered networks in entangled political economy. And furthermore, it actually, the study actually highlights the contribution of communication, both as a network in its own right, but as a broader phenomenon supporting other entangled networks in this innovation space. Certainly, I think there are additional opportunities to further explore the contribution of communicative effort in generating and sustaining entangled networks, and there are a whole range of potential opportunities for furtherance of empirical research as well. For example, to be able to use the now newly released Twitter API version 2, for example. So as I indicated, I do have some additional material in an appendix if we have time that we can discuss. We can discuss communicative framing and the sentiment, the emotional valence behind communication when people are tweeting about hydrogen. But what I might do, I might just stop the share and just see if we have any questions for discussion.
Perfect. Yeah, let's open up to questions. And yeah, fascinating. Thank you. Let's see. All right, and Mikayla, okay, I don't think I see any questions. So as people are, oh, I'm so sorry about that noise. This is unfortunate here. Anyway, as people are gathering their thoughts and thinking of questions, would you mind explaining again the entanglement measure, right? So like,
Yeah.
what does it mean, more entangled or less entangled? I don't think I fully understand that.
Okay, so so essentially there are a diversity of actors present in the network, and so to provide a quantitative or statistical indication of the extent of entanglement, I drew upon the classic Simpson diversity index, and so the issue here is that in these sort of networks, you'll have a diversity of actors, and so the purpose of the index is to establish the degree of diversity within the entangled network. So basically, what you do is you basically use that sort of diversity sort of index and compute a result. And so what the index indicates is that because there are a range of different categorical actors that are interfacing in the network, that is to say that you'll have, actors that I've categorized as political actors, actors that I've categorized as commercial actors, actors that I've categorized as academic actors, and so on and so forth, because there's actually a sort of rich intermingling of such actors within the network. Statistically, I'm able to derive a relatively high value for that Simpson diversity index, which again ranges from 0 to 1.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I missed the step which you discussed earlier. Now I realize with the characterization of different actors, of course. That makes sense. All right, and I think we have a question from Pedro. So, yeah.
Hey, thank you. Good to see you, Mikayla, and thank you for the project. Thank you for sharing that with us, because I think it's such fascinating. We have all this data there for free. Just need to go and collect and apply to so many different fields that we can do. And so it's good to see your project and get inspired to think other things. I had a couple of points, but I'll make one now and then I'll think a little bit better on the second, because the one now is related to what we were just saying about categorization. So my thing is like, how do you pin down in the end a category? Because I'm considering many actors will be shifting all that. No, so academia, I know that we tag as academia, but we also act as political actors many times. We also have political discourses, like agents in commerce, in economy, they're also acting. So it's all conflate. So I was just curious about how hard it was for you to pin down these categories, and how did you, if you can guide us a little bit in the rationale on how you giving the final word on the players and going, if it was a challenge or if you had some guidance on that as well.
If we take the entanglement metaphor too literally, we sort of get ourselves in a sort of nihilistic position where we can't actually categorize anyone because everyone's involved in everything. But that's evidently not true. People will tend to specialize in the world in terms of their activity. And so it was actually relatively straightforward, in terms of being able to sort of manually attribute sort of primary activity category to each of the actors. For example, with let's say the major sort of companies, that's fairly straightforward because they'll either have a presence on the stock exchange or they'll have basically an Australian taxation office, specifically identifiable ABN, Australian business number. So, you know, it's actually pretty easy to do that. In terms of the non-government organisations, well, there are registers for non-government official registers for non-government organisations. That's pretty straightforward. As to the academics, well, you can easily just go on the website and find out, hey, presto, there's an academic. So that's pretty straightforward. Yeah, there were some, you know, slightly sort of tricky sort of categories for a couple of them. So, for example, one actor by the name of Malcolm Turnbull, who was Australia's 44th Prime Minister. So he was sort of hounded out of office in 2016, but he has sort of taken on himself sort of a role as being a prominent activist and advocate for hydrogen and other renewable sort of technology. So the question will be here is, you know, do I categorize him as a politician or as an individual? Well, he's a former politician, and we don't, well, certainly in my home country, we don't sort of attach sort of the labels of political office forever to somebody. Once you're a former politician, you're not a politician anymore. So, you'll have a couple of examples like that, but it's reasonably straightforward. I think in the end, you know, one has to actually sort of defend. And this is kind of what I'm doing here. I'm actually, and will be very soon, I'm defending my work. I have to rationalize and defend my work, and that includes I have to defend actively, concertedly if I need to, the categorizations that I've attributed to my 200 actors that I collected for 6 months. And I'm pretty confident that I have at least a reasonable basis that can be understood by other people as to how to categorize these actors by category. Because as you've indicated, as you've implied, the categories actually do quite a bit of work, right, in the thesis, including in terms of deriving these entanglement indices. Thanks. You're muted.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. And Pedro, you have your hand up. Is it another question or?
I think Roger wanna say something, maybe.
Do you have another one? Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
I do. Yeah. Thank you, Mikayla. I like it. So I was just thinking, if you have this step forward, if from your data we can get insights also about the categories that cooperate the most, the categories that kind of clash the most, and which type of combinations are more like efficient in pushing a narrative or pushing some arguments. And like, just curious about how the good entanglements, the bad entanglements, if there would be such a thing.
Well, that's a very good question. I would think from a from a public choice or constitutional political economy perspective, the observation of deep entanglements between political and commercial actors, especially given that sort of low and middle income taxpayers are effectively being compelled to cross-subsidize these sort of hydrogen entities, is problematic. And from a broader perspective of normative liberalism, furthermore problematic, because the question then arises as to, well, we have triadic networks that are being constructed in this hydrogen space, but they sort of confer costs, right, onto a range of unwilling third-party actors. So, primarily sort of taxpayers who are being forced to subsidise through government budgets these programs. So in a sense, that this represents departures from efficiency. There's probably another sense in which one could ask them, you can ask yourself a question about efficiency in terms of, let's say, prominence or influence within a communication network. And so you can imagine a statistical indicator where efficiency is denoted by, for example, let's say the diffusion of one's tweet as a ratio of the number of tweets that someone tweets out. So I'm putting it to you that the centrally positioned actors in the network and the most prominent ones, and you can go look in the sort of the working paper to actually see a list of 50, they're probably going to be the ones who may be regarded as being more efficient because they don't need to tweet out so much, but then they actually enjoy, by virtue of their status and influence within this entangled political economy of climate decarbonization, they're able to actually enjoy widespread diffusion of their tweets, retweeting and mentions and replies of their tweets without really having to do much by way of tweeting at all. Whereas by contrast, it is actually quite notable in my original data set that you'll have a range of peripheral actors on the edge of the network that are not very well known at all. They're just sort of, individual participants in the Twitter space. They'll be tweeting out a lot, right? And interestingly, they might be they might have an interesting habit, let's just say, of actually tweeting a small number of individuals constantly or repeatedly. One could regard such a sort of measure as being one of inefficiency. But that's really sort of a positive appraisal of a communication network with, I think, very significant normative influence, because it's very clear to me, and Dick, who's here with us, and others like Adam Martin have really brought to the fore just how important communication, influence, non-logical rhetoric, sentimentality is used to sort of project and to effectively purchase agreement among people. And then this is actually very, very important, I think, in this case study that I investigate.
Okay, and I think Roger, right? We have a question, and then I'll jump in after.
Great, thanks so much. Yeah, this is so important because you gotta make the rubber hit the road at some point.
Yeah.
So this is fabulous. And it's, newsflash, it's hard to do.
Yep.
And empirical work can be really thankless because there's always some test you didn't do or a procedure you didn't perform. So the troll you're giving trolls lots of opportunities if you do something empirical. But it's terribly important. So this is awesome. I'm struggling though on this one with entanglement in Twitter, right? I'm not quite getting the deal. Where there's entanglement, there is exchange. Twitter is not a place where contracts are made. So I saw you nod your head. Yeah, it's not like you hadn't thought about this, but I'm not getting how those kind of connect up. So that's my question.
Okay, so to the first observation, it's certainly true that over the time that I've been preparing this work, I've received quite regular petitioning about what about X, what about Y? Why haven't I studied emojis, for example, in Twitter? So the idea of exchange here, and to be sure, Roger, I don't necessarily, I admittedly probably don't get into as much depth in the working paper as I could, but I actually talk about it ad nauseum in the actual thesis, as you can imagine, right? I actually would sort of conceive Twitter as a mechanism of sort of, certainly low cost, very low cost, almost zero marginal cost, actually, sort of form of sort of communicative exchange. So basically, people are using this sort of platform as a discursive opportunity to exchange sort of perspectives and thoughts and perspectives about sort of hydrogen decarbonisation. I would grant you that obviously, given the sort of the low cost nature of social media, including Twitter, it's very difficult to create sort of exclusion boundaries, I guess, around the terms of those exchanges. There will be cases though where think about sort of the communicative exchange properties of Twitter, where you can mute someone that you don't want to listen to, you can block someone you don't want to listen to, you ignore them. Now the difficulty there is it's all I can really do is sort of collect on people's active communication. There's no means for me, I don't believe, to be able to sort of look at those sort of acts of exclusion that effectively impose implicit prices on, who talks and, what they sort of talk about. So I'm not able to, let's say, quantitatively track who's muting whom, who's blocking, and so on and the like. We certainly see with these Twitter networks, they're largely unidirectional in terms of the character of the ties. So we see a lot of instances where peripheral actors are making all sorts of claims and statements at some of the sort of the central actors that are really deeply involved in hydrogen decarbonisation. Those are not reciprocated. Those communications from the periphery are typically not reciprocated, and and that can be sort of represented as some sort of cost or limitation to the exchange, where some people are basically excluded or not included. I'm probably not really answering your question well. It's a good one, but certainly in sort of social media studies literature, there is reference to communication as an exchange more broadly. You're muted. Yep.
Yeah. Sorry. I have a squeaky chair over here, so you want me muted when I'm not talking.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was aimed at me. Yes. Okay. So
if I may respond.
Sure. Go ahead, Roger. Sorry.
No, I just right on to like communication is an exchange. I absolutely. I sort of want to think about that when I gave my question. But I mean, if there's entanglement, it's like more is being exchanged than meanings or concepts, but also resources. It's particularly and especially money, but not, of course, uniquely money. There's like access to political actors, stuff like that. And those are the sorts of exchanges that, if we talk about entangled political economy, that's what we're talking about, those kind of exchanges in which often three are tangling and not two. And I wasn't getting a link to that. That's kind of what I meant to ask.
Oh, look, yeah. So yeah, apologies. I did sort of, I don't think I glossed over it, but I did sort of refer to the fact that these are multi-layered networks, and I'm necessarily examining just one aspect of the multi-layered network. I'm not examining sort of resource networks or logistical networks or policy networks in any great depth, but to actually just recognize that to the extent that Marta and Dick's Simmelian diagnosis of the character of networks is true, that in effect, people are sort of engaging, for example, with political actors on Twitter, and those political actors have the capability of forging triadic networks in sort of resource contexts and logistic contexts and policy contexts, and I don't think it's any coincidence to me that a lot of attention is being directed in these sort of Twitter networks towards those very actors who, let's say, in real life, in the non-virtual sense, do have that powerful capacity as big players, right? You're using your terminology to be able to exert sort of triadic effects within the sort of broader ecology of entangled political economy. One potential extension for this study, and it's possible, I think it's possible for me to do it, is to actually then, I can do two things. I can either undergo some additional research to look at how the discussion on Twitter connects to, let's say, policy announcements of public funding, right? Or what I can do is further use another filter for my Twitter network to only look at, for example, announcements of public funding, government funding, right? Which, as you know, embedded or underpinning that in the multi-layered sense has to be, you know, the exertion of triadic networks, because there's an unwilling third party.
Fabulous, super. Thanks for that.
All right, great discussion. That was very, very helpful. And Roger, thank you for raising that question. I struggled with that a bit, but I think I'm more convinced now, because like there's this notion possibly that a search for attention is a search for connection here, right? And even though like directly there's no connection to resources necessarily, but your followers are your resource, right? Like the value of an influencer is in the number of subscribers and followers and all of that. So I think Mikayla is definitely onto something very, very valuable here. And I wish we lived in a world where it was a little more outrageous for political actors to retweet private actors, right, and so on. But it's okay now. It's fine, right, to engage. Or journalists, right? Journalists are very openly political on Twitter, so it's not outrageous anymore. But I have a sort of a question, sort of like zooming out, right? Like so you have this creation of religion here almost, right? Like if we go, because you mentioned non-logical action, and that's basically what it is. It's a smoke screen, right? And I think one of the things that stuck with me from Dick's writings is that it's not about about the absence of knowledge, right? So like we're engaging in projects here, the decarbonization projects, where it's the only way to discuss whether these projects are going to do what they're about to do is in terms of it's guesswork, right? Or it's ideological discussion. There is no facts, right? So this is a good idea, and we believe in this idea. It's basically like it's a belief, right? But it gives people a sense of doing something and participating in the community. So I guess like a social scientist, what's our job here? Is it should we focus on like questioning particular projects or the non-logical action, right? And demonstrate. Yeah. Anyway, it seems you thought.
Yeah, I mean, you can certainly, in the spirit of questioning, you can question both the sort of the propriety of individual projects, especially to the extent that they can secure governmental funding that involves unwitting losing sort of third parties and triadic exchanges. But you can also meditate about the capacity of these systems as a whole, you know, to be able to use communication as an important fount for influence to purchase effectively acquiescence into these arrangements, which you know, which are more the like of credence goods. I mean, so you don't know actually the extent to which any given hydrogen project, and none of these have got it off the ground. This is very important to understand. It's still very, very open and questionable as to whether hydrogen decarbonisation will actually ever be scalable and feasible in an economic sense. So we aren't necessarily speaking here in this sort of embryonic space, in the sort of the world of credence goods, of feelings, right, of feelings, of attitudes, of determination, and and gumption, right, to try to address what is increasingly perceived as a important social problem, that is dealing with sort of climate change. So this is why, just to sort of double down on sort of Roger's question, which is perfectly appropriate, I think. Why I'm actually interested in the communicative aspect of this. And I'll come back, because you've addressed, you sort of mentioned this as well too, Marta, is that yes, it's very true that economists think about exchanges in terms of resources. I'm putting the claim out there that exchanges can be promulgated in terms of communicative sort of claims, basically a process of conjectures and refutations to discover which claims resonate, sort of more deeply and more diffusely in the world. But please understand that what am I trying to do here? I'm empirically trying to make, and one aspect of a multi-layered entangled political economy empirically tractable, and that is the understudied communication networks. We're very, very familiar with resource networks, the exchange of materialities. We know this. This is actually, quite a prominent sort of feature of entangled political economy theory. As we know, what I'm trying to do is push the envelope a little bit more, building on Dick, building on Adam Martin, and say, look, communication's actually important. And hey, presto, you can actually use quantitative techniques to identify network structure.
Okay, excellent. Let's see if we have any. Okay, Roger, right? You have a follow-up?
Just as a sort of a brief thumbs up that these network metrics, connectivity, and all this stuff like that Mikayla is doing. That's pretty current stuff. It hasn't been around for that long. It's an important tool, So I think it's awesome if like folks in our club, so to speak, are like plugged into those tools, using them, and know how to use them, all that stuff like that. That's wonderful. It's great. These are important techniques with a lot of potential for entangled political economy.
Yeah, I think so. I think the next, there's several dimensions in which to work and to build upon entangled political economy. And the empirics of entangled political economy have to be sort of one element of that. So, we have some very rich case studies which serve as qualitative forms of empirical evidence, but build up the quantitative. So an example of the qualitative I referred to was Dick's study with Adam Martin and Bruce Yandel on TARP and the NRA, so the responses to GFC, which I think is just a wonderful case study approach. In an entangled political economy context, there are opportunities to build on this in several ways: network theory, empirical analysis, agent-based modeling, what have you.
All right. I see Matthew has a question, has a hand up. So, yeah.
Yeah. Great talk. Really enjoyed it. And sorry for having my microphone on earlier. I sincerely hope I wasn't sitting here talking to myself, thinking it was on mute.
Oh, good.
But I had a question about. So this is two questions. Sort of one is kind of a naive, like I'm new to network analysis kind of stuff. So I suppose the entanglement idea in this context, I guess, has to do with there's a network of private actors and a network of public actors, maybe to sort of put it crudely. And there's also a lot of overlap, right? And that diagram that you had early on, kind of demonstrates that or illustrates it. And so does so is what you've done so far here, these entanglement measures that you're calculating, should I be thinking of this in terms of the strength of a network in the public sphere, or a strength of a network in the private sphere, or the strength of sort of the network between the networks? Those are sort of vague questions about these measures, and the entanglement of which network are we talking about, or sort of the network among networks, or and then I have another question, but I'll just let you kind of answer that first.
I think that's a good question, because if one were to sort of build on my analysis to then add to then intersect, for example, the communication network with, let's say, with a resource network or a policy network, you're going to have to, readily imagine, have to develop even like new and special measures for entanglement or diversity, to sort of reckon with the fact that, for example, you might actually have someone who's very highly active in the communicative space, which is the space I'm studying, whereas let's say a peripheral social movement actor, an activist of some sort, it's easy to talk on Twitter. It's low cost, zero marginal cost once you set up an account. Away you go. Whereas, a social movement activist, and I'm making assumptions here, of course, is that, a typical activist may not have readily at their disposal $100 million, though you'll actually be surprised about how many actually do in my network. But you'll then require, some sort of different, sort of measure to see how often a given actor simultaneously interacts in the different networks. So the entanglement index that I'm just deriving here only pertains to what I've studied, which is the Twitter communication network for Australian actors, and as I said, the manual categorization that I did of kinds of actors in the network is doing a lot of work, right? And it's doing a lot of work in explaining entanglement, because I have, commercial enterprises, I have political, governmental agencies, and you've rightly identified that they intertwine and overlap in terms of tweeting each other, right? And then on top of that, right, and this also feeds into the entanglement index, the statistics I generated, is I have about, so 2 categories, I have about 6 categories of different actors, right? So business representative organizations like your chambers of commerce. I then have your academics, your academic research institutes. That's another category. Activist organizations, individuals, right? Prominent individuals, they're categorized as another category of actors. So it's really, what are these index numbers illustrating? Well, it's just illustrating the extent to which all these diverse actors are sort of intertwining with each other in terms of tweets, recognizing that the network not only consists of commercial enterprises, not only consists of political enterprises, but other actors as well. So it is genuinely an index. Entanglement is read as synonymous with diversity, right? And that's what the numbers are illustrating there, the extent of diversity. There's a credible amount of diversity qua entanglement.
Yeah, thank you. That was really helpful. I guess so. Sort of piggybacking on top of that, then, is like, and this relates to Roger's point earlier about within the Twitter network, in some sense, like, talk is cheap, right? So these networks might have a different, so communication within that network might be, so this is the thought that occurs to me, is that the communication in that network might behave very differently than the communication that you see in the market price system, right? So if you have, if any of this is maybe a suggestion for future research, but I presume that some of these actors are representatives of like energy firms.
Yep.
And if we can see how the activity on the Twitter network relates to activity in the and I'm basically thinking of a network in terms of like a covariance matrix of like of stock returns primarily, for these companies, so that's just one sort of question that I was thinking about while looking at this and thinking, okay, this is what's going on with people talking to each other. How is that reflected in market values of these enterprises? If we see some connectivity between some company and some public official, is that reflected in their in other measures of measures of the value of that company, or are the measures of value of other companies maybe diminished, or are interlinkages there? So I mean, that's a complicated question, but it's just sort of one potential way to take it.
There certainly is, and one could imagine an alternative study by focusing on, let's say, Twitter conversations, or there could be Reddit conversations, or Facebook conversations, to the extent that you can get data from Facebook these days after Cambridge Analytica. You can sort of look at an alternative set of possibilities where you look at discourse around, let's say, coal, right? Discourse around natural gas. The hydrocarbon, carbon emitting sort of sources of energy. And, one could look at, let's say, a correlation between, let's say, sentiment towards sort of coal companies on Twitter or where have you, and the market valuation of those sort of coal producing firms. I'd imagine that there'll be there'll be some degree of correlation between, let's say, negative sentimentality expressed towards such companies and the sort of the relative valuation of firms. Putting aside the important qualification that it seems very obvious to me that hydrocarbons are no way on the way out. In fact, we're still in a sort of a very much a developing world where actually people need access to cheap electricity, to be able to sustain sort of the prospect of economic material flourishing. So one has to sort of bear that in mind as well. I just want to say just very briefly about the talk is cheap thing, because I'm always a little bit leery about that. People actually partake in efforts to communicate. Figures from Frank Knight, James Buchanan, Dick Wagner sort of refer to, and Vincent Ostrom as well, refer to the sort of strategic character of communication, and that surely must invoke some effort that is sort of costly along various margins. I also note to you that for any given tweet there is a limited amount of characters, and there is a school of thought in social media studies is that the limitations on the amount of characters that you can post in a tweet, putting aside the fact that you can sort of tweet multiple times a day, but putting that aside, the fact of the limited character attributed to each tweet, implies an implicit cost in terms of a desire to strategically craft a tweet for effective diffusion and influence within the network. So there is actually elements of strategy involved in tweeting. It's not just some sort of mindless exercise. And in fact, I would say to you that for major energy companies which are represented in my studies, you'll actually have marketing teams with multi-million-dollar budgets that are trying to actually work out, sort of how to tweet and to do other things online for maximal influence. Talk ain't cheap.
All right. So, okay, Pedro, I guess I don't see your hand anymore. Yes, that's that great points, right? And the enabling role, right? So like there's this innovation here. So I think it's in Rogers, I don't know, Big Players, one of the earlier books, that if your definition of an apple is not the same as the definition of an apple I have, we can't communicate, right? So we have to have those common terms, right? Right, and that's innovation, the ideological innovation here that drives this conversation, sort of makes some of those the wheeling and dealing possible, I guess. Anyway,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If I might just intervene there. So one of the, and this is, included in the broader thesis, not included here in the presentation, that one of the founts for controversy in this space is, what does hydrogen actually, what does hydrogen innovation mean? What is true hydrogen innovation that's going to truly decarbonize? Because there's actually a lot of controversy about the use of non-renewable fossil fuel resources in the production of hydrogen, even at a trial level that's been taking place. So you'll have a lot of critics that sort of say that blue hydrogen, brown hydrogen, grey hydrogen that use natural gas or oil, oh, that's not hydrogen decarbonisation. Then you'll get, Twitter melts down, right? So you'll find great bones of contention in this space among many things, and you might have margins for for innovation in terms of shared understanding, but they take time to materialize.
excellent. All right. I think this is the place where we should usually end. The goal is to finish at 10 to 4 so that people can make it to the next appointment. Mikayla, thank you for great defense. I guess in our eyes, you're fully defended. So good luck next month. This was a wonderful presentation, very inspiring. There's so much potential here for others to take up. So thank you. And we will have one more meeting in this academic year next month with Cameron Harwick. So I'll see you all then. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. See you soon.